Clara Whitmore tore the letter in half the moment she saw him. Not because he had lied, not because he had deceived her, but because the man standing on that platform, mud-caked boots, cracked hands, silence wrapped around him like a second skin, was nothing like the soul who had written to her for 3 months. The man in those letters had made her feel seen for the first time in her life. The man in front of her made her want to run. If you've ever judged someone too quickly and later had to swallow that judgment whole, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow Clara's story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Wyoming Territory, autumn 1886. The train slowed with the groan of iron and steam, and Clara Whitmore sat perfectly still in her seat, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her traveling bag clutched between her feet like an anchor. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times during the long journey from Boston. She had imagined how it would feel to step off the train and find him waiting. She had pictured his eyes, thoughtful eyes she had decided based on the way he wrote. She had pictured his posture not arrogant, but solid. She had pictured the moment their eyes met, and some invisible understanding passed between them, a confirmation that the decision she had made in her small apartment on a cold February night had been the right one. She had pictured a great many things. None of them prepared her for Red Hollow, Wyoming. The town appeared suddenly beyond the train window, a scattering of wooden buildings along a main road that turned to mud every time the wind blew down from the mountains. A dry goods store, a livery. A church that listed slightly to the left, as if it had given up arguing with the wind. 3 horses tied outside a saloon that had no sign above its door, only a lamp burning in the window at 2:30 in the afternoon. Clara let out a breath she did not remember holding. This is where 3 months of letters had brought her. She was 27 years old, recently orphaned, and in possession of a small inheritance that would not last another 2 years at the rate she had been living. She had no siblings, no suitors she respected, no future in Boston that did not involve taking a position as a governess in someone else's house, raising someone else's children, growing old, in a room that was never truly hers. And then a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Harlow, who ran the dressmaker's shop near Tremont Street, had mentioned a rancher in Wyoming who was looking for a wife. Not in a desperate way, Mrs. Harlow had been careful to say. In a practical way. A man who understood that building a life was serious work, and that serious work required a serious partner. Clara had said she would think about it. She had written to him the following morning. Dean. The first letter Nathan Cole sent back was not what she expected. She had braced herself for something stiff and formal. A list of his assets. A description of his land. Perhaps a mention of livestock numbers, as if he were trying to convince her that his ranch was a sound investment. Instead, he wrote about a hawk. He had watched it for 3 mornings from the porch of his farmhouse, he said. The way it circled without hurrying. The way it knew exactly where it was going, even when it seemed to be drifting. He said it reminded him that patience was not the same thing as waiting, that knowing your direction was not the same thing as rushing toward it. Clara read that paragraph 4 times. Then she wrote back and told him about the magnolia tree outside her apartment window that bloomed every April, despite the fact that Boston was entirely indifferent to its existence. She said she had always admired things that bloomed without needing permission. He wrote back 3 days later, I think you and that tree have more in common than you realize. By the end of the 2nd week, she was writing to him every other day. By the end of the 1st month, she was reading his letters twice before she put them away. By the end of the 2nd month, she realized she had started listening for the sound of the mail slot in her front door, with a feeling she had not experienced since she was a girl waiting for her father to come home. Nathan Cole wrote about honesty with a casualness that startled her, as though honesty were simply the only reasonable way to move through the world. He wrote about the land with a reverence that was not romantic, but earned the reverence of a man who had broken his back working it and still believed it was worth the breaking. He wrote about his parents both gone now, and the house they had built together, and the fact that he had promised himself he would not let that house fall into silence. He never described himself. That was the detail she kept returning to. He described his horses. He described the particular color of a Wyoming sky before a lightning storm. He described the smell of pine sap and the way sound traveled differently in winter when the ground was frozen. He never once said what he looked like, and Clara, who had been courted by 3 men in Boston, all of whom had led with their appearance and followed with their intentions, found this omission so unusual that she had asked him about it directly. "You've told me about your land and your hawk and your parents' house," she wrote. "You haven't told me anything about yourself." His response came back in 4 days. "I'm the kind of man who is better understood by what he does than what he looks like. If that isn't enough for you to go on, I understand completely. But if you'd like to find out for yourself, I'll be at the Red Hollow station on the 15th of October. I'll be the one who shows up." Clara had stared at that letter for a long time. Then she had begun to pack. The train came to a full stop with a final shudder, and Clara stood, smoothed her traveling dress, and reached for her bag. The platform was nearly empty. A station master moved along the far end. 2 boys were chasing something along the far edge of the rail yard. A woman in a dark coat stood near the door of the station building watching the train with her arms crossed. And near the wooden post at the center of the platform, holding his hat in both hands, stood a man. Clara saw him before he saw her. She stopped at the top of the train steps. He was tall. She had not expected that. Broad across the shoulders in the way that comes from years of physical labor, not from any particular pride in one's own build. His clothes were clean but weathered. His boots were heavy and practical, and yes, there was mud on them, dried mud, the kind that came from a morning's work and did not come off easily. His face was tanned and lined. Not old, but not young either. A face that had spent a great deal of time outdoors and had the kind of stillness that belongs to people who do not speak unless they mean it. He looked up and found her standing on the steps. He did not smile. He simply looked. And in that moment, Clara Whitmore felt something she had not expected to feel: disappointment so sharp it was almost physical. This man had written her those letters. She descended the steps carefully, and in her left hand, the hand he could not see. From where he stood, she balled up the corner of his last letter, which she had brought with her, to read one more time on the journey, and had not quite been able to let go of. By the time she reached the platform, she had released it. She had let it fall between the train steps and the wooden boards below. "Clara Whitmore," she said, because one of them had to speak. "Nathan Cole," he said. His voice was quieter than she expected, steadier. "I recognized you from the photograph Mrs. Harlow sent." "I don't have a photograph of you," Clara said, and she heard the slight edge in her own voice and could not quite stop it. "No," Nathan said. "I know." A beat of silence. "Did Mrs. Harlow describe me?" she asked. "She said you were capable," he said, "and that you didn't suffer foolishness." Clara studied his face for some sign of mockery. There was none. "That's accurate," she said. He nodded once, picked up her traveling bag before she could object, and said, "Wagons this way." The ride to his ranch took nearly 40 minutes. For the first 20, neither of them said a word. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and watched the landscape, and told herself with the rational part of her mind that she was being unreasonable. That she had known going into this that she would be meeting a working rancher. That she had not expected elegance. That the man who had written those letters had never once pretended to be anything other than what he was. But the heart is not rational, and hers kept returning to the same impossible question. How? How could the man who had written about patience and purpose and the courage of things that bloom without permission, how could that man be sitting beside her in comfortable silence without seeming to notice that she was in crisis? "It's quiet out here," she finally said. "Most of the time." Nathan agreed. "Is that something you prefer? The quiet?" He considered this for a moment. She noticed that he did not rush his answers. He treated questions as though they deserved actual thought. "I don't prefer it exactly," he said. "I just stopped fighting it a long time ago." Clara looked at him. "What does that mean?" It means that out here the quiet is just part of things, like the cold in winter or the mud in spring. You can spend a lot of energy being bothered by it, or you can just live alongside it. She did not answer, but something about that answer stayed with her. They arrived at the ranch as the afternoon light was beginning to angle low and golden across the fields. Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his help, a fact that Nathan noted without comment, and stood in front of the farmhouse. It was not what she had pictured. She did not know exactly what she had pictured. Something larger, perhaps, something that looked more finished. But the house in front of her was a working house. Well-maintained, but undecorated. A porch that ran along the front with 2 chairs that had clearly been used heavily and repaired more than once. A window box beneath the front window that had held flowers at some point, but was empty now for the season. It was the window box that did something unexpected to her. Someone had planted flowers there. Not recently, but at some point. Someone had thought about flowers. In this remote, wind-scraped place, someone had believed that flowers were worth the effort. She filed that thought away without knowing why. Inside the house was clean. Not elegantly clean, not the kind of clean that comes from hired help and careful attention. The kind of clean that comes from a single person who has decided that order matters and maintains it himself without anyone to notice or praise him for it. Nathan set her bag at the foot of the stairs. "Your room is the one at the top of the landing," he said. "There's water in the pitcher. Dinner's usually around 6. I don't expect anything formal." "What do you expect?" Clara asked, turning to face him. He thought about it again, that pause that she was beginning to recognize. "I expect honesty," he said finally. "If something isn't working, say so. If you need something, ask. I'm not looking for someone to perform. I have enough things to manage without adding that." Clara stared at him. In 3 years of being courted in Boston, not a single man had said anything close to that. They had all wanted a performance. They had wanted her to be charming and agreeable and appropriately admiring. They had wanted her to reflect their own significance back at them. Nathan Cole appeared to want none of those things. She did not know whether that should make her feel relieved or more unsettled than she already was. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He nodded. "Supper at 6, he repeated, and he went back outside. Clara stood in her room at the top of the landing and took stock of her situation. She had left Boston with $23, a single trunk, her mother's pearl earrings, and the conviction that the man who wrote those letters was worth finding. She had found him. He was not what she had imagined. He was not unkind. That was the thing that complicated her thinking. He was not rough in manner, or inconsiderate, or the kind of man who ordered a woman around because he believed it was his right. He simply was in the way that the land outside the window simply was. Present, unadorned, asking nothing except that you deal with it as it actually existed, not as you had hoped it might. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the small traveling case where she kept his letters. She took out the most recent one, not the one she had dropped between the train steps, the copy she had made by hand before leaving Boston, and read it again. "I want to be straightforward with you, Miss Whitmore, because I think you're the kind of woman who deserves that. I don't have a great deal to offer in the way of comfort or luxury. What I have is land that I've worked honestly, a house that my parents built with their own hands, and the intention to treat a wife with the same respect I'd want shown to me. Whether that's enough is something only you can decide." She had read those words in her apartment in Boston and felt something shift inside her. She had thought, here is a man who does not pretend. Sitting on his bed now, in his house, in a territory she barely recognized, she thought, yes, he does not pretend. And that is the problem. Because the man I imagined was more than this. The man I imagined was the sum of everything those letters made me feel, and this man in front of me is simply a man. She put the letter away. She washed her face. She went downstairs at 6 o'clock because she had said she would. Dinner was simple. Beef stew that he had started before leaving to pick her up, She realized this later when she understood his routines and bread that was 2 days old but still acceptable. They sat across from each other at a table that was meant for a family and had never been used by one. "How long have you been in Wyoming?" she asked. "Born here," he said. "Left once, came back." "Where did you go?" "Denver, for about a year." "What brought you back?" He looked at his bowl for a moment. "My father got sick," he said. "By the time I came back, my mother was wearing herself thin, trying to manage everything. I stayed to help. And then they were both gone, and the ranch was mine, and—" He paused. "This is home," he said simply. Clara watched him. "What did you do in Denver?" He glanced up. "Why?" "Because you write like someone who has read a great deal," she said. "And I'm wondering where a rancher in Wyoming who was born here and came back finds time to read." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, something closer to recognition. "My mother insisted on it," he said. "She was from Pennsylvania. Her father had been a school teacher. She brought about 40 books with her when she married my father, and she made sure I'd read every one of them before I turned 16. "What kind of books?" "All kinds. History, philosophy, some poetry. She liked Whitman. I never admitted to her that I did too, but I did." Clara found herself looking at him differently. There it is, she thought. There is the man from the letters. He's in there. "I like Whitman as well," she said. "Which poem?" he asked. "Song of Myself," she said. "The part where he says he is large, that he contains multitudes." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, without any performance. "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself." Clara set down her fork. He picked his back up and continued eating as if he had simply said something ordinary. She looked at this worn, mud-booted, silent rancher across a table too large for two people in a territory she barely recognized, and something inside her became very, very quiet. Not resolved, but quiet. That night, unable to sleep, she sat at the small desk in her room and wrote a letter to Mrs. Harlow in Boston. She wrote, "He is not what I imagined, but I am beginning to think that may not be as simple a problem as I first believed." She folded it without sending it. In the morning, when she came downstairs, she found warm water waiting for her at the kitchen pump. Nathan was already outside before she had made it down the stairs. She stood in the kitchen with the warm water and realized that he had risen before dawn, before she had even considered moving and thought about her comfort, before thinking about his morning. She had not asked him to. He had not told her he had done it. He had simply done it. Clara Whitmore held both hands around the warm wash basin and stared out the kitchen window at the pale morning light coming over the fields, and thought, "I have badly misjudged this man." She did not yet know how badly. That would take considerably longer to understand. In the days that followed, a pattern established itself without either of them planning it. Nathan rose before dawn. He worked the ranch through the morning and into the afternoon, feeding livestock, repairing fences, managing the 100 small crises that a ranch produced daily. Clara, who had expected to feel useless and displaced, found instead that there was more to do than she had time for. She organized the farmhouse. She took stock of the food supplies and realized they were adequate but inefficiently managed. She went through the ledger he kept on the desk in the front room and discovered that Nathan Cole was a meticulous record keeper, but had no system for catching the small errors that accumulated over time. She said nothing about this at first. She simply began making notes. On the 5th day, she came to the breakfast table with a sheet of paper and set it down beside his coffee cup. He looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" "An error in your cattle supply account from last February," she said. "The feed supplier overcharged you by $7, and there's a pattern of the same discrepancy going back 18 months. Nathan picked up the paper. He was quiet for a long moment. "How did you find this?" he said. "I went through your records." She hesitated. "I hope that wasn't overstepping." He set the paper down, looked at it again, then looked at her with an expression she had not yet seen on him. Something that was not exactly surprise but was something adjacent to it. "Do you want to look at the rest of it?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "All right," he said. And that was that. They spent 3 evenings going through the ranch accounts together. Nathan brought the ledgers. Clara brought her system, which she had developed during the years after her father died, when she had managed the family finances alone and quietly, without anyone knowing she was doing it, because it was not considered appropriate for a woman to be visibly competent in such matters. It was the first time in her life that she had worked alongside a man who did not treat her competence as either a surprise or a threat. He asked her questions and listened to her answers. He disagreed with her interpretation of one entry and explained why and when she showed him the cross-reference that proved she was right. He said, "I was wrong, you're right," without any visible difficulty. Clara did not know what to do with this. In her experience, being right in the presence of a man required a certain amount of careful management of his feelings about being wrong. Nathan appeared to have no feelings about being wrong that required managing. Being wrong was simply a piece of information. He collected it and moved on. On the 3rd evening, when they had finished for the night, and she was gathering the papers, he said without looking up from the ledger, "Clara." "Yes, I want to say something." She looked at him. "I know this isn't what you pictured," he said. "I knew when you stepped off that train, I knew immediately that you were thinking you'd made a mistake. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because I think you should know that I understood, and I didn't blame you for it." Clara was still. "You came a long way based on some letters," Nathan continued. "That took courage. Regardless of how things, regardless of what happens. That took courage, and I want you to know I'm aware of it." She had not expected this. She had expected many things from him. Practicality, steadiness, that particular brand of quiet industry that she was beginning to recognize as his defining characteristic. She had not expected this direct, uncomplicated acknowledgement of her experience, of the difficulty of her position, of what it had cost her to get on that train. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out slightly lower than she intended. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest." She thought about that long after she went upstairs. She thought about how many times she had wanted someone to simply be honest with her, and how rarely it had happened, and how strange it was that she had come all this way to Wyoming and found it here in this unadorned house, with its empty window box and its warm water before dawn, and its man who quoted Whitman without making a production of it. She thought, "I do not know this man yet, but I think I need to," and somewhere between that thought and the moment she fell asleep, the letter she had been composing in her head, the one explaining that they had both perhaps made a mistake, and perhaps she should return east, began to seem like a great deal less of a certainty than it had before. 2 weeks into her time at the ranch, something happened that shifted everything. She overheard a conversation she was not meant to hear. She had walked to the barn to tell Nathan that one of the horses seemed to be favoring its left foreleg, and as she approached, she heard voices. Nathan's voice, and a voice she did not recognize. "Cole." The stranger's voice was pleasant in the way that blades are pleasant, smooth on the surface with an edge underneath. "I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to make an offer." "You made an offer," Nathan said. "I declined it." "That was 3 months ago. I'm prepared to increase the number." "The number isn't the point, Hargrove." "Hargrove." Clara stopped outside the barn door. "Then what is the point?" A pause. A sound of boots shifting. "You're one bad winter away from losing this place anyway, Cole. I'm offering you a chance to walk away with something in your pocket instead of nothing." "This is my family's land," Nathan said. His voice was completely level. "My father broke this ground. My mother planted every tree you can see from the road. I'm not selling." "Your father is dead," Hargrove said, "and sentiment doesn't pay debts." A silence. Then Nathan's voice, still level, but with something underneath it now. You have 30 seconds to get off my property before I help you leave." A short, cold laugh from Hargrove. "Think about it, Cole. That's all I ask." Clara stepped back as the sound of footsteps approached the barn door. She moved quickly to the side, pressing herself against the outer wall, and watched as a man walked past without seeing her. A man in a clean coat and expensive boots, who moved with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to getting what he wanted, and was merely inconvenienced by the delay. She waited until he had mounted his horse and ridden away. Then she went into the barn. Nathan was standing with his back to her, one hand resting on a post, staring at the far wall. "Who was that?" she asked. He turned. He had not heard her approach. "His name is Hargrove," Nathan said. "He owns the land east of mine. He's been trying to buy this ranch for 2 years." "Why does he want it?" "Water rights," Nathan said. "There's a creek that runs through the back of my property. Whoever owns this land controls the water access for 3 other ranches in the valley. He's been buying up land in this territory for 5 years, and mine is the last piece he needs." Clara absorbed this. "And you won't sell?" "No. Even if—" she hesitated. "Even if he's right that one bad winter could—" "Even then," Nathan said. He said it quietly, and without heat, as if it were simply a fact about gravity. "This is my family's land, Clara. My parents built this place before the territory was even established. My father used to say the land didn't belong to us, we belonged to the land. I know how that sounds." "It sounds like something worth fighting for," she said. He looked at her. She had not planned to say that. It came out of some place that she had not quite gotten to yet in her own understanding of herself. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Are you serious?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "I think I am." He nodded once, and then he looked at her with that expression again, the one she couldn't quite name, yet the one that was somewhere between recognition and something more careful than that. "I need to go check on the cattle," he said. "I know," Clara said. "Go." He went. She stood in the barn for a long moment. Then she went back to the house, sat down at the desk, pulled out the ranch ledger, and began looking for every piece of information she could find about what the ranch was actually worth, what it owed, and what it would take to protect it. She did not do this because anyone asked her to. She did not do this because it was her obligation. She did it because something in that conversation, something in the way Nathan Cole had said, "This is my family's land," without apology or theatrics or any appeal to her sympathy, had made her understand that she was not in fact the only person in this house who had everything to lose. And that changed things. That changed quite a lot of things. The night before the first snow of the season, she found a box of books on the shelf in the front room. She had seen them before but had not looked closely. Now she took one out. It was a collection of poetry. Well read. The binding was cracked, the pages soft with use. Inside the front cover in handwriting she did not recognize, smaller and more precise than Nathan's, were 2 lines. "For Nathan, who will understand these one day." Read them slowly. "Mama." Clara held the book for a long time. She thought about a woman who had carried 40 books across the country and believed that a boy on a Wyoming ranch needed poetry. She thought about the man those books had helped to build. She thought about the letters he had written to her patient, careful, honest letters that did not advertise themselves. Letters that had somehow crossed all the distance between them and found her in a small apartment in Boston, where she had been slowly disappearing into a life that did not fit her. She thought, he could not show me his face. So he showed me his mind. And his mind was everything. She set the book back carefully. She went to the window and looked out at the first snowflakes beginning to fall across the Wyoming dark. And she thought, I am not going home. She was not entirely sure when she had decided that. But she was certain, standing at that window with the snow beginning outside, that it was true. She was not going home. She was already here. The snow that had begun falling outside Clara's window that night did not stop until morning. She discovered this when she came downstairs before 6 o'clock and found the kitchen empty and the back door standing open an inch, letting in a thin blade of cold air. Nathan was already gone. The coffee pot was on the stove, still warm. Beside it on the counter sat a single biscuit wrapped in a cloth. She stood there looking at that biscuit for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. He had not left a note. He had not made any announcement the night before about leaving early. He had simply risen in the dark, made coffee, wrapped a biscuit in a cloth, so it would stay warm, and gone out to deal with whatever the first snow of the season required of a man running a cattle ranch alone. Clara poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and thought about this. She was beginning to understand something about Nathan Cole that she suspected very few people had ever taken the time to understand. He was not a man who communicated in words the way most people did. He communicated in actions so quiet and consistent that you could go an entire week without noticing them. And then one morning, you found yourself standing in a kitchen holding a warm biscuit he had left before dawn, and realizing that this was the language he spoke. Not speeches, not declarations. This. She ate the biscuit, drank the coffee. Then she put on her heaviest coat and went outside to find him. She found him at the far fence line, repairing a section that the wind had damaged overnight. He was working with his coat open, despite the cold, moving with the efficient economy of someone who had done this particular task so many times that his body did it without requiring much input from his mind. He heard her coming and turned. "You don't have to be out here," he said. "I know," Clara said. "What needs doing?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he handed her the end of the wire he was holding and said, "Keep tension on this while I secure the post." She kept tension on it. They worked for 2 hours without saying very much. By the time they came back inside, Clara's hands were numb, and she was fairly certain she had never been this cold in her life, and she felt inexplicably more settled in herself than she had since arriving in Wyoming. Nathan built the fire back up while she stood near it and tried to convince her fingers to work again. "You should have told me you were going out," she said. "I could have come sooner." "I didn't think you'd want to," he said. "Then you don't know me very well yet," she said. He glanced over at her from across the room. "No," he said. "I suppose I don't." A pause. "But I'm starting to," he added, and he said it so simply, with so little attempt to make it into something, it wasn't that Clara turned back to the fire before he could see her expression. She was not ready to name what she was feeling yet, but it was there. That much she could not deny. It was definitely there. The second week brought a series of small disasters that would have broken a lesser household. First, one of the barn's support beams cracked under the weight of accumulated snow and had to be repaired immediately, or risk losing half the structure. Nathan spent an entire day on it, working from before light until after dark, eating nothing but what Clara brought him at intervals. She brought coffee and bread, and at midday, a bowl of soup she had made from what was in the kitchen, and she set it on the workbench beside him, without saying anything, because she could see that stopping to have a conversation was not on his list of available options. He drank the soup without sitting down. He said as she was turning to leave, "Clara." She stopped. "This is going to sound strange," he said, "but having you here, it makes the work go faster. I don't know how to explain that." She thought about several responses. She said, "I understand what you mean." She went back to the house. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand on the counter. Then she started making more soup because there was enough left for supper, and she thought he was going to need it. The second crisis arrived 2 days later in the form of Tom Briggs, Nathan's nearest neighbor to the west, who arrived on horseback in the middle of a weekday morning, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for too long. Clara was the one who answered the door. Tom Briggs was in his 50s, sun-darkened, with the kind of face that had once been jovial and had since been sobered by experience. He looked at Clara with the particular expression that she had encountered several times since arriving in Wyoming, the expression of someone encountering her existence in this house, and still in the process of adjusting to it. "Mrs. Cole," he said, which was the first time anyone had called her that, and which hit her somewhere between the ribs in a way she had not expected. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "Nathan's in the barn. Come in, I'll get him. It's about Hargrove, Tom Briggs said, and he said it in a way that made her step back from the door to let him in without another word. She went to get Nathan. He came in from the barn, still in his work coat, and the moment he saw Tom Briggs's face, he said, "What happened?" It was not a question. It was the voice of someone who already knew the shape of bad news and was simply waiting to learn its dimensions. "He bought the Morrison place," Tom said. "Signed papers yesterday. Morrison didn't tell anyone, just took the money and signed." Nathan stood very still. "The Morrison place," he said. "That's right. That's east of me and south of you. That's right." Nathan pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down in it heavily. Not with despair. Clara had already learned that Nathan did not do despair, at least not visibly, but with the weight of a man processing new information and understanding its implications. Clara remained near the doorway. This was not her conversation, but she listened. "He now owns the Morrison place, the Henderson parcel, and the land north of the ridge," Nathan said. "If he gets my property, he controls the whole valley," Tom Briggs finished. "Water rights, grazing rights, everything. The rest of us would be at his mercy inside of 2 years." "Have you talked to Henderson?" "Henderson's scared. Has been since his wife got sick and the medical bills started stacking up. He's not going to hold out long." Nathan pressed his hands flat on the table. "How long do we have?" he said. "I don't know," Tom said. "But Hargrove doesn't sit on things. When he moves fast." After Tom Briggs left, Nathan sat at the table for a long time. Clara made coffee. She set a cup in front of him. She sat down across from him with her own. "Tell me what I don't know," she said. He looked up. "About the financial situation," she said. "I've gone through the ledger, but I don't have the full picture. If Hargrove is going to move quickly, I need to understand what we're actually working with." He studied her for a moment. "Why?" "Because you said I could help," Clara said. "And because I think I can. But not if you keep things from me in the name of not burdening me." Something moved across his face. Something difficult that he was deciding whether to let her see. "The ranch is not in ruin," he said finally. "But the last 2 years have been hard. The winter before last I lost 40 head of cattle. I covered the losses with a short-term loan from the bank in Laramie. That loan comes due in the spring." "How much?" he told her. She kept her face neutral. It was not a catastrophic number, but it was a number that, combined with everything else she now understood about the situation, painted a picture that required attention immediately. "And the bank is likely to extend," she said. "Maybe. If the winter isn't bad, and the spring sale goes well." "And if the winter is bad?" He was quiet. "Nathan," she said. "If the winter is bad," he said, "and the spring sale doesn't cover what I owe, and Hargrove comes to the bank before I can pay—" He stopped. "He's a significant depositor at that bank. I have reason to believe he's had conversations with the manager already." Clara set her coffee cup down. "He's trying to get the bank to call the loan early." "I don't have proof," Nathan said. "But you believe it?" "Yes." She folded her hands on the table. She was thinking faster than she was speaking, running numbers in her head, cross-referencing what she had seen in the ledger with what he had just told her. "There are 3 errors in your cattle supply invoices going back 18 months, she said. "We've already established that. The overcharges total just over $30. That's not going to change." "I'm not finished," she said. He closed his mouth. "There's also a credit on your account with the feed merchant in Casper that you apparently never claimed. I found the original invoice 3 days ago in the bottom of your correspondence box. That credit is $42. And there is a grazing rights fee that you've been paying on the south pasture that, based on the original deed your father filed with the territorial office, you are not legally obligated to pay. That fee has been collected monthly for 6 years." Nathan stared at her. "How do you know what's in my father's deed?" he said. "Because I found the copy he kept in the tin box in the front closet, and I read it," Clara said. "I hope that wasn't overstepping." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You went through my front closet." You said you wanted honesty, Clara said. I'm giving you a full accounting. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, How much is the grazing fee per month? $3.50. 6 years, he said. That's $252 that someone has been collecting from you that they had no right to collect, Clara said. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the silences she had come to expect from Nathan Cole. This one had weight to it. Not anger, not yet. Something more controlled than anger. Something that was setting itself into the framework of his thinking and finding a place to sit. Who's been collecting it? He said. The fee goes to a land management office in Cheyenne, Clara said. I haven't had time to trace it further, but I intend to. Nathan looked at her across the table. He looked at her for a long moment, with that expression she still couldn't fully name, the one that was something more than recognition, and something more careful than admiration, and something she was not ready to define yet. Clara, he said. Yes. I wrote to you for 3 months because Mrs. Harlow said you were capable. I know. I don't think she knew what she was talking about, he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. I mean that as a compliment, he said quickly. She told me you were capable. She didn't tell me you were... He stopped, seemed to search for the word. Thorough, Clara offered. I was going to say formidable, he said. She was surprised by the word. She was more surprised by the fact that he said it without any of the edge that men usually put on that word when they applied it to women. He said it the way he said everything else, as plain fact. As information, as something that was simply true and deserved to be stated. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than she had meant it the last time she'd said it to him. He nodded, and then he picked up his coffee cup and they sat together at the kitchen table and began seriously and practically to figure out how to save his ranch. What she did not know yet, what she would not discover until later, was that this conversation, this ordinary Tuesday morning at a kitchen table in Red Hollow, Wyoming, was the moment Nathan Cole stopped thinking of her as the woman who had come to be his wife, and started thinking of her as the person he could not afford to lose. He would not tell her that for a very long time, but he knew it that morning. He knew it the moment she said, I'm not finished, and he closed his mouth and listened. 3 days later, Clara rode into town for the first time. Nathan drove the wagon. They had a list of things to collect from the dry goods store, and Clara had her own agenda. The land management office had a local representative, and she intended to find him. Red Hollow was not large, but it was alive in the way that small frontier towns were alive, with the constant awareness of everyone's business and a social architecture that she was just beginning to understand. The first thing she noticed when they pulled up outside the dry goods store was the women on the opposite side of the road. 3 of them, standing near the entrance to what appeared to be a milliner's shop, watching the wagon pull up with an interest that was not entirely friendly. Who are those women? She asked quietly. The one in green is Ada Mortimer, Nathan said, climbing down. Her husband is on the town council. The one beside her is Ruth Calloway. Her family has been in Red Hollow longer than anyone. The third one I don't know by name. New. Are they going to be a problem? He handed her down from the wagon. That depends on you, he said. How so? Ada Mortimer has opinions about mail-order arrangements, he said. She's made them known before. The question is whether you want to engage with that or not. Clara looked across the street. Ada Mortimer met her eyes without flinching. There was something assessing in her gaze, not entirely unkind, but not welcoming either. I'll be at the dry goods store, Nathan said. I'll find you, Clara said, and she crossed the street. Ada Mortimer watched her come. Mrs. Cole, Ada said, which told Clara that news traveled fast in Red Hollow. Mrs. Mortimer, Clara said, I understand you've been here longer than most. I was hoping to ask someone who knows the town about the land management office. A pause. The 3 women exchanged a quick glance. The land management office, Ada Mortimer repeated. Yes, I understand there's a local representative. Gerald Pruitt, Ruth Calloway said before Ada could answer. He works out of the back room at the assayer's office on Tuesdays. Thank you, Clara said. Is today Tuesday? It is, Ruth said. Then I won't take any more of your time, Clara said. I appreciate it. She was turning to go when Ada Mortimer said, Mrs. Cole. Clara turned back. Ada studied her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating a conclusion they'd already drawn. Nathan Cole is a good man, she said. He's had a difficult few years. I hope you understand what you've come to. It was not an insult. It was not exactly a welcome either. It was something in between a statement from a woman who cared about the community she lived in and was withholding final judgment. I'm beginning to, Clara said. I appreciate you saying so. Ada gave a short nod. Clara went to find Gerald Pruitt. Gerald Pruitt was a small, paper-colored man in his late 40s who clearly had not expected anyone to come looking for him that Tuesday, or possibly any Tuesday, in recent memory. He looked up from his desk with the expression of someone who has grown accustomed to being overlooked and did not know whether to be relieved or alarmed at being found. Mr. Pruitt, Clara said. My name is Clara Cole. I'd like to discuss a grazing rights fee that my husband has been paying on his south pasture. Gerald Pruitt blinked. Which property? The Cole Ranch, Nathan Cole, south pasture approximately 80 acres bordering the creek. Pruitt turned to a filing cabinet. He pulled a folder. He opened it. He read for a moment. Then he closed it. The fee is standard, he said. For use of... The south pasture is deeded property, Clara said. I have a copy of the original filing. The deed includes explicit grazing rights in perpetuity, registered with the Territorial Office in 1871. The monthly fee being collected from my husband has no legal basis. Pruitt stared at her. I'd like to know who authorized the fee, she said, and I'd like to know who has been receiving the payments. He stared at her for another long moment. Then quietly he said, Mrs. Cole, I think you should be very careful about the questions you're asking. Clara felt the change in the room, the shift in his tone from bureaucratic deflection to something that had a sharper edge underneath. Why? She said. Because some questions in this territory, Pruitt said, have answers that make life difficult for the people who ask them. He held her gaze. She held his. I appreciate the warning, she said. I'd still like the information. Pruitt looked down at the folder in his hands. Then slowly he opened it again. He ran his finger down a column. And when he looked up, something in his expression had changed, something that looked less like caution and more like a decision. The authorization came through a land brokerage in Cheyenne, he said very quietly. Filed under a corporate name. But the beneficial owner, the one who receives the payments. He stopped. Yes, Clara said. He wrote a name on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk. Clara looked at it. The name on the slip of paper was Hargrove. She rode back to the dry goods store, with that piece of paper in her coat pocket, and a cold, crystalline anger in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Hargrove had been collecting an illegal fee from Nathan's ranch for 6 years. Not content to simply try to buy the land, he had been slowly bleeding it from the other side. She found Nathan loading supplies into the wagon bed. She waited until they were out of town and the road was empty before she told him. She told him everything. Pruitt, the corporate name, the folder, and the name on the slip of paper. Nathan's hands tightened on the reins. 6 years, he said. Yes. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not speak again until they reached the ranch. Then he said, My father paid that fee. The words landed between them with a weight she had not anticipated. His father had paid it. For however many years before Nathan took over the ranch, before the loan, before any of it. His father had paid a fee to a man who had no right to collect it, and had never known the difference, and Nathan had continued paying it without question because it was on the books, and it had always been there. Nathan, she said. Don't, he said, not harshly, but firmly. Give me a minute. She gave him a minute, then she said, we can file for recovery of the payments. It's illegal collection. A territorial court takes months, Nathan said. The loan comes due in the spring. I know, but the recovery filing gives us leverage. If Hargrove goes to the bank and tries to call the loan early, we can counter with evidence of fraud. That changes the picture considerably. He looked at her. You've already thought about this, he said. I've been thinking about it since I left Pruitt's office, she said. I've also been thinking about this. If Hargrove is running this kind of scheme on your ranch, he's likely running it on others. Tom Briggs, Henderson, maybe the Morrison property as well before he bought it. The realization spread across Nathan's face slowly. If we can prove that, then we're not fighting this alone, Clara said. He's not just your problem, he's the Valley's problem, and the Valley, if they understand what's actually happening, might be willing to fight back. Nathan stared straight ahead at the road for a moment. Then he said very quietly, When I wrote those letters, I told you I was looking for someone who could stand beside me. I remember, Clara said. I didn't know what that would actually look like, he said. I had an idea, but I didn't know. The wagon moved through the cold afternoon air. Nathan, Clara said. Yes. I want to be honest with you about something. He glanced at her. When I got off that train, she said, I was ready to leave. I had the letter half written in my head before we reached the ranch. I thought... She stopped. I thought I had fallen in love with the man who wrote those letters, and that the man standing on the platform was someone different. He was very still. I was wrong, she said. Not about being disappointed, that was real. But I was wrong about what it meant. Those letters weren't a version of you that didn't exist. They were the version of you that no one had taken the time to know. Nathan said nothing. I'm taking the time, Clara said. I want you to know that. The silence that followed was the quietest silence she had ever experienced. Not empty, not uncomfortable, full the way silence gets when it contains something too large for words to hold. After a long moment, Nathan said, That means more to me than I know how to say. Then don't say it, she said. Just keep leaving warm water in the morning. She heard him exhale. And then for the first time since she had arrived in Red Hollow, Wyoming, she heard Nathan Cole laugh. It was not a large laugh. It was quiet the way he was quiet. But it was real. And Clara Whitmore. Clara Cole turned her face toward the road ahead and felt something settle into place inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock. She did not have a name for it yet. But she knew with the certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to trust her own instincts, even when she pretended otherwise, that whatever it was, she was not afraid of it. She was in fact beginning to look forward to finding out exactly what it was. And that night after supper, when Nathan spread the ranch documents across the kitchen table and looked at her and said simply, All right, let's figure this out. She sat down across from him and thought, This is what it looks like. This is what standing beside someone actually looks like. Not perfect, not easy, not what she had imagined. Better. The documents they spread across the kitchen table that night became the architecture of a fight neither of them had planned to wage alone. Clara organized everything by date. Nathan organized everything by type. They discovered quickly that their systems conflicted, argued about it for 10 minutes, and then arrived at a third system that was better than either of the originals. This was, Clara thought, a reasonable summary of how the two of them operated in general. By midnight, they had a clear picture. Hargrove's illegal grazing fee had cost Nathan $252 over 6 years, and his father an unknown amount before that. The 3 invoice errors with the feed supplier totaled $31 and change. The unclaimed credit from Casper was $42. Combined, they were looking at recoverable funds that would make a significant dent in what Nathan owed the bank. But the more important discovery was what Clara found when she cross-referenced the land management filings Nathan had in his tin box with the list of other ranches Tom Briggs had mentioned. The same fee, the same fraudulent monthly collection appeared on the Henderson parcel. She set the page down in front of Nathan without speaking. He looked at it, then he looked at her. Henderson's been paying it too, he said. For at least 4 years, based on the filing dates, she said. I don't have access to his records, but if the pattern holds, then Hargrove has been running this on multiple properties simultaneously, Nathan said. He sat back. He's not just buying land. He's been bankrupting people into selling it to him. Yes, Clara said. That's what I believe. The silence in the kitchen had the quality of something that has just shifted into a higher gear. We need to talk to Tom Briggs tomorrow, Nathan said. And Henderson, Clara said. Henderson is scared. I know, but he's less scared of us than he is of Hargrove. If we show him evidence, if we show him that this has been done to him deliberately, that he's been defrauded, anger is a more useful emotion than fear. We need him angry. Nathan looked at her. You're very good at this, he said. I had an education that everyone around me thought was wasted on a woman, Clara said. I've been waiting a long time to prove them wrong. He said nothing, but the way he looked at her said everything she needed to hear. They rode to Tom Briggs's place the following morning, in the thin, hard cold of early November. Tom met them at his door with the expression of a man who had been up since before light worrying, and Clara did not waste time on pleasantries. She put the documents on his kitchen table and told him what they'd found. Tom Briggs read the pages slowly. He was not a fast reader, but he was a thorough one, and when he raised his head from the papers, his face had gone through several distinct phases of emotion and arrived at something hard and focused. He's been collecting this from me too, Tom said. I never questioned it. It was in my father's accounts. I thought it was legitimate. It's not, Clara said. The deeds predate the fee. He had no legal authority to collect it. Tom Briggs set the papers down with great deliberateness. How many others? He said. We don't know yet, Nathan said. We think Henderson, possibly Morrison before he sold. Morrison, Tom said grimly. If Morrison was being bled dry for years before Hargrove came in with an offer, he stopped. He didn't sell because he wanted to. He sold because he had to. That's our belief, Clara said. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up from the table and reached for his coat. Where are you going? Nathan asked. To get Henderson, Tom said. He needs to hear this today. Henderson was harder. He was a thin, exhausted man in his early 50s, whose wife had been ill for 2 years, and who carried his financial fear so visibly that it had become part of his posture, a permanent forward lean, as if bracing against a wind only he could feel. He looked at the documents Clara laid out with the expression of someone who already knew the news was bad and had simply been waiting for it to arrive in its final form. Even if this is true, he said, what can we do? He's already got Morrison's place. He's already got the Ridge property. If he calls my note... He can't call your note if you go to the bank first, Clara said. Henderson looked up. File today, she said. File for recovery of the fraudulent fees. Walk into that bank with the deed and the filing dates and the evidence of illegal collection, and tell the manager that you are pursuing legal remedy for fraud committed against your property. That changes your status from a debtor at risk of default to a complainant in an active fraud case. The bank will be very reluctant to be seen assisting someone who has been defrauding their customers, Clara said, once those customers make the situation visible. Henderson stared at her. Tom Briggs said from the corner of the room, She's right, James. Henderson looked at Nathan. Is she always like this? Nathan said, yes. He said it with such perfect, unself-conscious certainty, as though the answer had never been in question, that Clara had to look at the documents in front of her to keep her expression composed. They left Henderson's place 2 hours later with his agreement to file the next morning. On the ride back, Tom Briggs pulled his horse alongside their wagon and said, Hargrove's going to know we're moving against him. Once Henderson files, there's no keeping this quiet. Good, Nathan said. Tom looked at him. Good. I'm tired of waiting for him to make his next move, Nathan said. Let him know we're coming. Clara looked at him from the wagon seat beside her. This was a version of Nathan she had not yet seen, not different from the man she had been learning, but a dimension of him she hadn't encountered at full strength. The patience was still there, but the patience had direction now. It had somewhere to go. She thought, This is what he looks like when he decides to fight. She filed it away carefully. The filing took 3 days to prepare properly. Clara wrote the legal summary herself, working from the deed documents and the land management filings and the payment records Nathan had kept with meticulous, unknowing accuracy for years. She had no formal legal training, but she had read enough of her father's correspondence. He had been a contract manager for a shipping company to understand the structure of a legal argument and to know what a territorial court would need to see. Nathan watched her work in the evenings, and occasionally she would read a section aloud, and he would tell her if it accurately described the timeline of events, and twice he caught details she had misread from his handwriting in the older ledgers. They were good at this together. That was the thing she kept encountering, and kept being mildly astonished by. They were genuinely practically good at being in the same room, working on the same problem. On the second night, he brought her coffee without her asking and set it beside her without interrupting her work, and she said without looking up, "Thank you." And he said, "You haven't eaten since noon." And she said, "I know." And he went back to the kitchen, and 20 minutes later, set a plate of food beside the coffee, and she ate it while continuing to write, and neither of them made anything of it. On the third night, when she was reading through the final draft, she said, "Nathan, I need you to tell me something." "All right." "The loan from the Laramie Bank. What are the exact terms, not the amount? The terms." He sat down across from her. He recited them from memory because of course he had them memorized because he was a man who carried his obligations with total awareness of their weight. She listened. Then she said, "There's a provision in the Standard Territorial Lending Agreement from this period that gives the borrower 60 days' notice before early collection can be demanded. Do you have your original loan document?" He went to the tin box in the front closet. He came back with a folded paper. She read it. Her finger stopped on a paragraph. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "Your loan cannot be called early without 60 days written notice delivered to you personally. Hargrove cannot go to the bank and have this called tomorrow. He would have to file the notice, and you would have 60 days from receipt." Nathan read the paragraph. Read it again. "I didn't know that was in there," he said. "Most borrowers don't read the full terms," she said. "It's not an oversight on your part, but it means we have more time than we thought." He set the document down on the table. He put both hands flat on it. He breathed. And then he said something she was not prepared for. "Clara," he said, "I have to tell you something. Something I should have told you before." She set down her pen. The tone of his voice had changed. Not dramatically. Nathan did not do things dramatically. But she had been learning his voice for weeks now, and she heard the difference. "There's a reason I went to Denver," he said. "When my father got sick." "You went to take care of him," she said. "Before that," Nathan said. "The reason I was in Denver in the first place." He paused. "I went because I was about to lose this ranch." Clara was still. "I was 24, he said. My father had been ill for a year and couldn't work the way he used to, and I made bad decisions. I was young and I was proud, and I thought I could manage it all myself, and I ran the operation into the ground in about 18 months. I had debts I couldn't pay. I went to Denver because I thought maybe I could earn enough to send back to keep the bank from foreclosing." "What happened?" she said quietly. "I found work, enough to send something home each month. My mother managed the rest. She was more capable than either my father or I ever gave her credit for." A pause. "But by the time my father's illness got serious enough that I came back, there was a new debt I hadn't told them about. A promissory note I'd signed in Denver. To a man who was not the kind of man you should sign notes to." Clara looked at him steadily. "I paid it," Nathan said. "It took me 4 years and I paid every cent, and I've never spoken of it to anyone. But the reason that bank loan from Laramie exists, the reason I'm carrying that debt now, is partly because of what I did at 24. The bad decisions I made, the debts I created when I was trying to outrun my own mistakes." He was looking at the table. "I told you in my letters that I believed in honesty," he said. "I do, but I also came to you without telling you the full truth about my situation. Not because I wanted to deceive you, because I was ashamed. And I thought, I thought if I could resolve it before it became your problem, you'd never have to know." The kitchen was very quiet. "Nathan," Clara said. He looked up. "You were 24 years old and you were trying to save your family's home, and you made mistakes," she said. "And then you spent 4 years fixing them without asking anyone for help." He said nothing. "That is not a shameful story," she said. "That's the story of someone who learned something very hard in a very hard way. It's the story of nearly every person who's ever tried to carry too much alone." He looked at her with an expression that was for Nathan Cole as close to naked as she had ever seen him. "You're not angry," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm not angry," she said. "I would have liked to know sooner, but I'm not angry." He exhaled. "There's one more thing," he said. "Tell me." "Hargrove," he said. "The man in Denver, the one I signed the promissory note to." He stopped. His name wasn't Hargrove, but when he came to this ranch 2 years ago with his first offer, there was a man with him, a man I recognized. Clara's hands went still on the table. "One of Hargrove's men was in Denver when I was there," Nathan said. "I don't know what it means. I don't know if there's a connection or if it's coincidence. But I've been thinking about it since you found that fee document, and I think you should know." Clara looked at the documents in front of her, at the filings, at the names, at the pattern she had been assembling piece by piece since the morning she had walked into Gerald Pruitt's office and asked the questions that made a small man nervous. She thought about what it meant if Hargrove's reach extended back 10 years, if he had not simply been trying to buy the Cole Ranch for 2 years, but had been engineering a situation slowly, patiently, from multiple directions for far longer than anyone had understood. She looked at Nathan. "How sure are you?" she said. "Sure enough that I should have told you weeks ago," he said. She picked up her pen. "Then we need to add a section to this filing," she said. He blinked. Right now," she said. "Before we file tomorrow. If there's a prior connection between Hargrove's organization and this ranch, the territorial court needs to know. It changes the characterization of the fraud. It's not opportunistic, it's systematic." He stared at her for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me what you need." "Tell me everything you remember about Denver," she said. "Every detail. Don't decide what's important. Just tell me." He told her. She wrote for 2 hours. By the time she finished, the fire had burned low, and the clock on the mantel read 1:30 in the morning, and Nathan was sitting across from her with his coffee cold in front of him, and outside the window, the first real blizzard of the season had arrived, without either of them noticing. Clara set down the pen and looked up and said, "When did that start?" Nathan turned to look at the window. "A while ago," he said. "I didn't want to interrupt you." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. Exhaustion settled into her all at once, the way it does when the work that was holding it back is finally finished. "It's done," she said. "Is it enough?" he asked. She looked at the stack of pages in front of her. "I think so," she said. "I think it's more than enough. The question is whether the court—" She stopped. A sound. Outside. Not the wind. Something else. Something that came and went. Nathan heard it too. He was already on his feet. "Stay here," he said. "Nathan." But he was already at the door pulling on his coat. She did not stay. She got her own coat and followed him outside, and walked directly into the full force of the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The snow was coming sideways, driving and dense, and visibility was near nothing. Nathan was ahead of her, moving toward the barn with purpose, and she followed his tracks even as the wind began to fill them. Inside the barn, the source of the sound was immediately clear. One of the horses was down. Not Nathan's working horse, the older mare, the one he'd had since before his parents died. She was on her side in the stall, breathing rapidly, her eyes showing white. Nathan was on his knees beside her before Clara had fully processed the scene. "What's wrong with her?" Clara said. "Colic," Nathan said. "She's been prone to it when temperatures drop this fast." His hands moved over the mare's side with practiced urgency. "I need her up. She can't stay down. What do you need me to do? Hold her head, he said. Talk to her. Keep her calm while I try to get her moving. Clara knelt at the mare's head. She put her hands on either side of the animal's face and looked into the large, distressed eye and said very steadily, "It's all right. We're here. You're all right." She did not know if horses understood words. She suspected they understood tone. She kept her voice even. Nathan worked for 40 minutes. Clara did not move from the mare's head. Outside the storm built to a full howl, and inside the barn the three of them existed in the strange suspended world of a crisis that demands complete attention and permits nothing else. When the mare finally came to her feet, unsteady blowing but standing, Nathan exhaled so completely that his whole body seemed to lose 6 inches. He stood beside the mare with one hand on her neck and his head bowed, and for a moment he simply breathed. Clara stood up. Her knees ached from the stall floor. Her fingers were cold through her gloves. "She's going to be all right," she said. "I think so," he said. "I need to stay with her a while." "I'll stay," Clara said. He looked at her. "You don't have to." "Nathan," she said, "stop telling me what I don't have to do." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "All right." They stayed in the barn together for another 2 hours, trading off watching the mare, making sure she stayed on her feet. Her breathing steadied. Her temperature didn't spike. They sat on hay bales pulled close to her stall and talked in low voices because it was late and quiet, and the storm was doing all the loud work outside. "Tell me about your mother," Clara said at one point. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because you loved her, and because I think she was more than you've told me." He was still for a beat. Then he said, "She used to sing while she cooked. Nothing anyone would recognize. Just songs she made up. About what was happening. About the weather or the garden or whatever was on her mind. My father used to say she narrated her own life in musical form." Clara smiled. "She sounds wonderful," she said. "She was the smartest person I've ever known," Nathan said. "Smarter than she ever let anyone outside this house see. She said a woman who shows all of her intelligence at once makes men feel like they've been ambushed." Clara was very quiet for a moment. "That's exactly right," she said. Nathan glanced at her. "Is that what you did?" he said. "Before you came here, I did it my whole life," she said. "I showed enough to be considered charming and not enough to be considered threatening. I was very good at it. I hated it completely." "You haven't done it here," he said. "No," she said. "I haven't." She said it simply without making it into a declaration, but they both understood what it meant. She had not hidden herself in this house. She had shown him everything. Her competence, her stubbornness, her anger at Hargrove, her grief about her parents, that surfaced occasionally when she wasn't guarding herself, her capacity for a plan, her willingness to kneel on a cold barn floor for 40 minutes, talking to a sick horse. She had shown him all of it, and he had not once looked at any part of it as though it was too much. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "When you wrote to me when you decided to write to a woman you'd never met and ask her to come here, what did you actually hope for?" He took a long time with the answer. "I hoped for exactly this," he said finally. She looked at him. "I didn't know that's what I was hoping for," he said. "I would have said I was looking for a practical partnership. A woman who understood what ranch life was and could be a real part of it. I would have said I was being sensible." He paused. "But if I'm honest, I was hoping for someone I could actually talk to. Someone who would be real with me. I've been alone a long time, and the loneliness I minded most wasn't the absence of company. It was the absence of someone to be fully myself with." Clara held this. "I think that's what the letters were," he said. "I could be fully myself in the letters. I didn't know if I could be that in person. I was afraid you'd come here and I'd go silent and you'd think the letters were a lie." "They weren't a lie," she said. "No," he said. "But they were easier than this." "This is better than the letters," Clara said. He looked at her. She met his eyes and did not look away. "The letters were who you are in your best moments," she said. "This?" She gestured at the barn, the storm outside the mare, standing quietly now behind them, the documents waiting on the kitchen table, the whole impossible real shape of the life they were building. "This is who you are in all of them, and the letters didn't prepare me for this. But I'm glad I'm here for it." Nathan Cole looked at the woman sitting across from him on a hay bale in a Wyoming barn in the middle of a blizzard at 2 a.m, and he felt something move through him that he did not have adequate words for. He had been careful with himself for a long time, careful with his hope, careful with the parts of himself that could be hurt. A man who has lost his parents and nearly lost his land and learned the hard way what it costs to trust the wrong people develops a certain careful quality, and Nathan had developed it thoroughly. But sitting here with Clara in the cold and the ordinary difficulty of a hard night, he felt the careful quality begin to loosen at its edges. He did not say any of this, but he reached over without planning to and put his hand briefly over hers where it rested on the hay bale between them. Just for a moment, just enough to mean something. Then he took his hand back and said, "We should get some sleep. We're filing tomorrow." "Yes," Clara said. She stood up. She did not say anything about what had just happened. She did not make it into something that required discussion or definition. But as they walked back through the storm to the house, she was aware of her hand where he had touched it, and she thought, "Whatever this is, I am not afraid of it. I am not afraid of it at all." In the morning she discovered that the storm had taken down the fence on the south pasture, and while Nathan was out before dawn assessing the damage, a rider arrived at the ranch carrying a letter. It was addressed to Nathan Cole from the First Territorial Bank of Laramie. Clara stood at the door with the letter in her hands and read the return address, and knew before she opened it what it was going to say. She opened it anyway. It was a notice of early loan collection. Hargrove had moved faster than they'd thought. 60 days notice, Nathan's loan document said. The letter in her hands was dated 3 days ago, which meant the clock had already started, which meant everything they had built across those late nights, and those documents, and those careful, necessary conversations, had just become a great deal more urgent than they had planned for. She was still standing at the door with the letter when Nathan came back from the fence line, his coat covered in snow, his face unreadable in the way that meant he was already managing something difficult. He saw her face. He stopped. "What is it?" he said. She held up the letter. He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and took it from her hands. He read it. He read it again. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his coat pocket, and looked at her. "We file today," he said. "Yes," she said. "How fast can you get ready?" "I'm already ready," Clara said. He looked at her, this woman who had arrived on his platform 2 months ago with disappointment in her eyes and a balled-up letter in her fist. This woman who had gone through his closets and his ledgers and his past and his worst mistakes and had not flinched at any of it, and he thought, "I do not deserve this. But I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets it." He said, "Let's go." And they went. The ride to Laramie took 4 hours in the cold, and they did not waste a minute of it. Clara held the document case on her lap and went through every page one final time, reading aloud the sections she was least certain about, while Nathan drove and listened, and caught 2 places where her phrasing was ambiguous and could be argued against. She fixed them in pencil as they moved, pressing the paper against the case with steady hands, despite the rocking of the wagon. This was what they had become in 2 months. Not what she had imagined when she boarded the train in Boston. Something more functional than that. Something that had weight and traction, and the particular strength of 2 people who had stopped performing for each other and started actually working. She had thought once that she was looking for a man who matched her imagination. She understood now that she had been looking for something she couldn't have named, then a person who made her feel like her full self was not only acceptable, but necessary. She had found that in a worn coat and mud-caked boots on a Wyoming platform. She had been too foolish to see it for 3 weeks. She would not make that mistake again. The bank in Laramie was a solid stone building on the main street, and the manager was a man named Arthur Fenwick, who had the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to keep his face pleasant while his mind moves fast in all directions. He greeted Nathan with the particular warmth of a man who owes a significant depositor a favor, and was clearly expecting this to be a routine and uncomfortable conversation about loan terms. He was not expecting Clara. She watched him recalibrate when Nathan introduced her, the slight adjustment of posture, the reassessment behind the eyes, the decision he made about how seriously to take her presence. She had seen that calculation performed on her face her entire adult life, and she let him make it and said nothing, because she had learned that the moment just after a man decides a woman is not a significant variable in the room is often the most useful moment available. Fenwick settled behind his desk and folded his hands and said with the measured sympathy of a man delivering bad news he considers inevitable, "Mr. Cole, I assume you've received our notice." "I have," Nathan said. He was completely calm. He had been completely calm since the moment he read the letter that morning. Clara had noticed this about him, that when things became most serious, he became most still. It was not passivity. It was the particular stillness of a man who has decided exactly what he is going to do and is simply executing it. "I want you to know," Fenwick said, "that this was not my preferred course of action. The circumstances." "Mr. Fenwick," Clara said. Both men looked at her. She opened the document case and placed the fraud filing on the desk between them. Then she placed the deed copies. Then the land management records. Then the payment histories with the dates and amounts clearly marked. She placed them one at a time with the deliberateness of someone who wants each item to be seen individually before the full picture becomes apparent. Fenwick looked at the pages. His expression did not change, but his stillness changed. It shifted from the controlled stillness of a man in charge of a conversation to the more cautious stillness of a man who is reading something he was not prepared to read. "This is a fraud filing," Clara said, "filed this morning with the Territorial Court in Cheyenne. It documents a systematic pattern of illegal fee collection conducted against multiple ranches in this valley, including my husband's property, over a period of at least 6 years. The fees were collected under false authority, falsely filed with the Land Management Office, and the payments routed to a beneficial owner whose identity we have documented." Fenwick had stopped looking at the pages. He was looking at her. "The beneficial owner," she continued, "is the same individual who requested early collection on my husband's loan. I believe you know who that is, Mr. Fenwick." A pause. "I'm going to ask you a direct question," Clara said. "And I would like a direct answer because I think you are a man who understands that the next 60 seconds are going to determine which side of this situation the First Territorial Bank finds itself on." Fenwick said nothing, but he was listening. She could feel him listening with his entire body. "Did Calvin Hargrove contact you and request that this loan be called early?" she said. The silence stretched exactly long enough to be an answer. Then Fenwick said carefully, "I received a communication from a significant depositor expressing concern about the bank's exposure on certain accounts." "That's a yes," Nathan said very quietly. Fenwick looked at him. "Mr. Cole, it's a yes," Nathan said again. "I'm not angry with you, Fenwick. I understand the position you were in, but I need you to understand mine." He leaned forward slightly. "My family has banked with this institution for 16 years. Nathan said. "My father opened this account when I was 8 years old. In 16 years, we have never defaulted on a payment. We have never made a late payment. We have never asked for an accommodation we didn't need." He paused. "And now, a man who has been defrauding my family for 6 years, and possibly longer, has come to you and asked you to help him finish the job. And I would like to know." His voice did not rise, but something in it became very direct. "Whether the First Territorial Bank of Laramie is in the business of helping men like that." Fenwick looked at the documents on his desk. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "Mrs. Cole, how long would you need?" Clara had the number ready. She had calculated it the previous night between reading the loan terms aloud and writing the Denver section of the filing. "90 days," she said. "90 days from today, to resolve the fraud recovery, present the corrected accounts, and bring the loan current through the spring cattle sale." Fenwick picked up the fraud filing and read the first page properly. He turned to the second page. He set it down. "I'll need to review the full documentation," he said. "Of course," Clara said. "And I'll need a formal response to the early collection notice." "I have one prepared," she said, and placed the fourth document on the desk. Fenwick looked at Nathan. "Your wife," he said, "is thorough." "Yes," Nathan said. "She is." It was, Clara thought, the finest compliment she had ever received in a professional context, and it had come delivered entirely without irony in a bank manager's office in Laramie, Wyoming, from a man who had begun the meeting assuming she was decorative. They left the bank with a written agreement for 90 days suspension of the early collection notice pending review of the fraud filing. On the steps outside, Nathan stopped. He stood still for a moment with the cold air on his face. Clara stood beside him. 90 days, he said. "It's enough," she said. "The recovery filing alone will account for most of what you owe if the court moves quickly. Tom and Henderson filing simultaneously strengthens the case considerably." "What if Hargrove counters?" "He will counter," she said. "He's going to be angry. He's going to come at this from every angle he has." She paused. "But he's been operating in the dark. He's been assuming that the people he was defrauding didn't know and wouldn't find out and wouldn't fight back. We've just walked into a bank and proven that 3 of them have evidence and are fighting back together. That changes his calculation entirely." Nathan turned to look at her. "Are you afraid?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "A little," she said. "But not of him." "Then what?" She looked at him directly. "Of getting this wrong," she said. "Of building something this carefully and still losing it because of some detail I missed." She paused. "I don't want you to lose this ranch, Nathan." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I know you don't." He said it simply as a statement of fact he had complete confidence in, and she felt it land in her chest like something warm. They were halfway back to the wagon when a voice called Nathan's name. They both turned. The man crossing the street toward them was someone Clara had not seen before, mid-40s, lean with a face that had been handsome once, and was now sharpened past handsome into something less comfortable. He was wearing clothes that were too clean for the weather and a smile that did not touch his eyes. "Cole," he said. "And this must be the new wife." He said it with the particular brand of social pleasantness that is designed to make the recipient feel slightly off balance without being able to identify the reason. Clara recognized the technique because she had grown up surrounded by men who used it. "Hargrove," Nathan said. Clara felt her entire body recalibrate. This was him. She had built a detailed picture of Calvin Hargrove across weeks of documents and filings and second-hand accounts, and the man in front of her was both exactly what she expected and somehow more immediate than any of that preparation had allowed for. "I heard you were in town," Hargrove said pleasantly. "Visiting the bank. I hope everything is in order." "Everything is very much in order," Nathan said. "Good, good." Hargrove's gaze moved to Clara. "Mrs. Cole, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Red Hollow is a small place I'm surprised we haven't crossed paths before now." "We've been busy," Clara said. "So I understand." His smile did not waver. "You know, I've always had a great deal of respect for Nathan's family. His father was a determined man. There's something admirable about that kind of determination, even when—" a slight pause. "Circumstances don't cooperate." "Mr. Hargrove," Clara said. "Mrs. Cole, I'm going to save us both some time," she said. "We filed this morning, fraud recovery. 3 properties, 6 years of documented illegal collection, and a connection to a Denver land brokerage that I think will be of significant interest to the territorial court." She watched his face. "I want you to know that directly from me before you hear it from someone else, because I think you're a man who prefers to know where things stand." The pleasantness on Hargrove's face thinned slightly, just slightly, but enough. That's a serious accusation, he said. It's a filed legal complaint, she said. The accusation stage is behind us. A beat of silence. Then Hargrove looked at Nathan. She's quite something, he said. Yes, Nathan said. She is. I hope, Hargrove said, and the pleasantness was entirely gone, now replaced by something that had more edges. That you understand what you're starting. We understand exactly what we're starting, Nathan said, and we're starting it anyway. Hargrove held his gaze for a long moment. Then he said with the precision of a man who has turned threats into complete sentences for long enough that it comes naturally, "This territory has a way of being very difficult for people who make enemies they can't afford." "So does a territorial courtroom," Clara said. Hargrove looked at her one more time. Then he turned and walked away. Clara waited until he had rounded the corner before she let herself breathe. "Are you all right?" Nathan said. "Yes," she said. "You were magnificent," he said. It was so direct and so uncomplicated. No qualifications, no performance, just a simple statement of what he had observed, that she laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, short, and surprised, the kind that comes when something is genuinely funny to a person who is also genuinely relieved. "Don't tell me that right after I've confronted a man like that," she said. "I'm trying to stay composed." "You were composed," he said. "And magnificent." They drove home in the early dark, and Clara sat beside Nathan on the wagon seat and felt the particular kind of tired that comes after a day that has required you to be entirely present for every moment of it. About a mile from the ranch, Nathan said, "Clara." "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment. This was the kind of quiet she had learned to read, not the quiet of someone avoiding a subject, but the quiet of someone finding the right way into one. "When you came here," he said, "I had an idea of what I was offering you. A working ranch, a practical life, a partnership in the kind of work that most people would consider hard and unglamorous." He paused. "What I didn't anticipate was that you would see this place. Not just the work, the whole thing, the history of it, what it meant to my family, what it cost." Another pause. "I didn't expect anyone to care about that the way you do." Clara was quiet. "I want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens with Hargrove and the bank and the court, whatever the outcome, you have already given this place something it didn't have before, something it needed." "What did I give it?" she said. He thought about it for a long time. "Someone who fights for it like it's hers," he said. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road ahead. "It is mine," she said. "That's how I think of it." He nodded once, as if she had confirmed something he had already believed. "Good," he said, one word. But in Nathan Cole's economy of expression, it carried the weight of a great deal more. 3 days later, the first countermove came, not from Hargrove directly. From the Land Management Office in Cheyenne, a formal letter stating that the records Clara had obtained from Gerald Pruitt were considered internal documents and had not been properly authorized for release, and that any legal filing based on those records would be subject to challenge. Clara read the letter at the breakfast table. She set it down. She picked up her coffee cup. She set that down too. "What does it say?" Nathan asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then carefully he said, "Does this?" "No," she said. "It complicates things. It doesn't undo them." "How?" "Pruitt gave me those records voluntarily," she said. "He made a choice. His supervisor may not be happy about that choice, but the records themselves are accurate, and the deed filings are in the public record, regardless of what the Land Management Office says about internal documents." She was already thinking through it, tracking the problem to its edges. "Hargrove pressured someone in Cheyenne to send that letter. He's trying to make us think our evidence is weaker than it is. Is he succeeding?" Nathan said. She looked at him. "What do you think?" He almost smiled. "I think you're about to write another letter." "I'm about to write 3, she said, standing up from the table. "One to the territorial court, one to Pruitt directly, and one to a man I know in Cheyenne who was a colleague of my father's and who I believe still has connections at the recorder's office." "You know someone in Cheyenne?" "I know someone who knows someone," she said, which in my experience is usually enough. She was at the desk in the front room within 10 minutes, and she wrote for an hour without stopping. Nathan brought her coffee. He did not interrupt her. He went about his morning work and came back, and the coffee was cold and she had moved on to the second letter, and he took the cup away and brought a fresh one. She said without looking up, "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with the cold coffee cup in his hand, looking at her with an expression she had finally found the word for. It had taken her 2 months, and the word was home. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that is home. Not the sentiment of it, the fact of it. The specific, practical, irreplaceable fact. She turned back to the letter. But she carried that look with her for the rest of the morning, like a lamp someone had placed inside her chest. The response from Cheyenne arrived in 6 days. Her father's colleague, a retired land surveyor named Edmund Gray, who had no particular reason to help her, except that he had respected her father and believed, as he had written to her father once, that competence deserved support. Regardless of who it came packaged in, had pulled the original deed filings for every property in the valley and compared them against the land management fee schedules for the same period. He had found what Clara suspected. The illegal fee collection wasn't limited to 3 properties. It was on 7. 7 ranches in the Red Hollow Valley had been paying a fee with no legal basis for periods ranging from 3 to 9 years. The total amount of illegal collection across all 7 properties was just under $1,400. Clara sat with that number for a long time. Then she went to find Nathan. He was in the barn. She walked in, and he turned and read her face immediately. "Good news or bad?" he said. "Both," she said. "Complicated." She told him. She watched him absorb it, the scale of it, the reach of it, the fact that what they had discovered in the Cole Ranch ledger was the edge of something much larger than either of them had understood. "7 properties," he said. "Yes. He's been building this for years, deliberately, systematically." "Yes." "And the end goal? Control the water rights," Clara said. "Control the valley. Every property he couldn't buy outright, he was bleeding until the owners had no choice but to sell. The ones who were most vulnerable sold. The ones who were more stable are still standing, but they're paying fees that are eating into their margins every month." Nathan leaned against the barn wall. "We can't fight this alone," he said. "No," Clara said. "But we're not alone. That's the point." She paused. "I want to call a meeting. All 7 property owners, here at the ranch as soon as we can get everyone together. Show them the evidence. Show them the scale of it. Let them see that they're not isolated victims, they're part of a pattern. And then we fight it together," Nathan said. "Yes." He was quiet. "Nathan," she said, "this is going to get harder before it gets easier." "I know. Hargrove is going to come at this from every direction he has. He's going to try to frighten people. He may try to frighten us specifically." "I know." "Are you ready for that?" He looked at her steadily. "Clara," he said, "I have been holding this ranch together alone for 4 years, carrying the debt and the work and the fear of losing it by myself every day without anyone to—" He stopped. "I have been ready for a long time. I was just waiting for someone to be ready with me." She held his gaze. Something between them had been shifting for weeks slowly, the way a river changes course, not in a single moment, but through the accumulation of small, persistent pressures, and she could feel how close it was now to having shifted entirely. She said, "Nathan, I want to ask you something." "Ask." "That night in the barn, with the mare." She paused. "You put your hand over mine." He was very still. "I know," he said. "I want you to know that I—" She stopped, started again. "I didn't want you to take it back," she said. The barn was absolutely quiet. Nathan looked at her with that expression home she thought still that word, and then he crossed the space between them, and he took her hand the way he had that night. Except this time, he did not take it back. He held it, and she held his. And they stood there in the middle of everything, the debt and the fraud and the documents and the fight and the 7 ranches and the territorial court and Hargrove and all of it, and held each other's hands in a barn in Wyoming, and for a moment the whole of it fell away, and there was only this. "I didn't plan on this," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she said. "I thought I was writing letters to a practical woman who needed a practical situation," he said. "I thought it would be reasonable, manageable. I thought I would be careful." "You were careful," she said. "Not careful enough," he said, and the way he said it made it clear that he did not consider this a failure. She looked at their joined hands. "I tore your letter," she said. "On the platform, when I saw you." He was quiet. "I tore the last letter you sent me in half," she said. "I dropped it between the train steps." "I didn't know that," he said. "I want you to know it," she said. "Because you deserve to know it, and because I am so sorry for it." The man who wrote those letters and the man standing on that platform were the same person, and I was too locked in my own expectations to see it. And if I had gotten back on that train... "Clara," he said, "if I had gotten back on that train, I would have spent the rest of my life." "Clara." She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression that was patient and clear and entirely present. "You didn't get back on the train," he said. She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Then that's the only part that matters," he said. She thought about arguing with this, about insisting that the acknowledgement was important, that the apology mattered, that what she had felt on that platform had cost him something, even if he would never say so. But looking at him, she understood that he genuinely meant it. He was not minimizing. He was not performing forgiveness. He simply completely, and without any residual injury, believed that she had stayed, and that that was the whole of the story. She thought, this is what he is. This is the man who wrote those letters. This is who he is every day in every ordinary moment, and I almost missed all of it. "All right," she said. She did not let go of his hand. "We have a meeting to organize," she said. "We do," he said, "and 3 letters to send." 3 letters, he agreed, and a fraud case to win. "Yes." They stood there another moment. Then Clara said, "Nathan." "Yes." "If we win this..." "When?" he said. She looked at him. "When we win this," she said, and felt the word settle into her like a decision she had already made and only just recognized. "I want to plant something in that window box." He was quiet for a beat. "The one out front," he said. "It had flowers once," she said. "Someone thought they were worth planting." "My mother," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I'd like to plant them again." Nathan Cole looked at his wife in the half-light of the barn, this woman who had arrived on his platform 2 months ago and had proceeded with methodical and unstoppable thoroughness to understand everything about him. His land, his debt, his past, his grief, his mother's books, his way of showing care without announcing it, and he thought, the letters opened the door, but she is the one who walked through it. "Plant whatever you want," he said, and he said it the way he said everything that truly mattered, quietly, completely, without any performance at all. As if it were simply the most natural thing in the world, which by now it was. The meeting happened on a Thursday. 7 ranching families in the Red Hollow Valley sitting around tables that Nathan had borrowed from the church and set up in the farmhouse front room and the kitchen, holding cups of coffee that Clara had made in 4 separate batches, because the pot only held so much at a time. Tom Briggs was there. Henderson was there, thinner than the last time Clara had seen him, with the particular thinness of a man who has been eating worry instead of food. The Kellerman brothers had come from the North Pasture operation, twins in their 40s who finished each other's sentences and had apparently never trusted anyone outside their family in the entire history of their existence until this moment. A widow named Sadie Marsh sat near the fireplace with her hands folded and the expression of someone who has already made up her mind and is waiting for everyone else to catch up. And two families Clara had not met before, the Dunns from the East Side, and old Walter Price, 71 years old and the longest-standing landowner in the valley, who had come because Tom Briggs told them to, and because in Red Hollow Tom Briggs's words still meant something. Nathan stood at the front of the room. He was not a man built for speeches. Clara knew this about him. He was built for work and for quiet and for the kind of communication that happened through action rather than words. But he stood at the front of his parents' front room, and he spoke well, because he was telling the truth. And the truth has its own momentum. He told them everything: the fee, the deed, the filings, Clara's discovery, Pruitt's records, the connection to the Denver brokerage, the scale of the collection across 7 properties over as many as 9 years. He told them about the bank letter and the 90-day suspension. He told them about Edmund Gray's findings. He told them about Hargrove's countermove through the Cheyenne Land Management Office and why it had failed. The room was very quiet while he spoke. The kind of quiet that has texture to it. The quiet of people listening with their entire bodies, feeling the shape of something land and adjust everything they thought they understood. When Nathan finished, Henderson said, "How much? Total. Across all of us." $1,400, Clara said. Henderson made a sound that was not quite a word. 9 years, old Walter Price said. He said it the way you say something when you are calculating the weight of something you've been carrying without knowing it. 9 years I've been paying that fee. I never once... He stopped. I thought it was legitimate. It was designed to look legitimate, Clara said. That's the point. He built a paper architecture around it carefully enough that no individual rancher would have reason to question it. The only way to see it was to look at all of it together. Which you did, Sadie Marsh said from near the fireplace. Not a question. Which I did, Clara said. Sadie Marsh looked at her with the expression of a woman assessing another woman and finding the assessment satisfactory. Good, she said simply. The Kellerman brothers exchanged one of their wordless communications. The one on the left, James Clara had learned, said, "What do we need to do?" "Sign the joint filing," Clara said. "I've prepared individual affidavits for each property documenting the specific fee amounts and payment histories. If each of you signs your affidavit and we file them together as a consolidated fraud complaint, we are no longer 7 separate individuals making allegations against a powerful man. We are a documented, coordinated legal action representing $1,400 in illegal collection, 9 years of systematic fraud, and the economic destabilization of an entire valley." She paused. "That is a very different thing to walk into a territorial court," she said. The room was quiet again. Then Walter Price said, "Where do I sign?" One by one they signed. Henderson's hand shook slightly when he picked up the pen, but he signed. The Kellerman brothers signed simultaneously, which was not legally required but was entirely in character. Sadie Marsh signed without hesitation, and with the particular firmness of someone making a point as well as a legal commitment. When the last signature was on the last page, Clara gathered the documents with hands that were steadier than she felt, and looked at the room full of people who had come to a stranger's house and trusted a woman they barely knew with something that could determine the future of everything they owned. "Thank you," she said. "All of you." "Don't thank us yet," Tom Briggs said. "Thank us when it's over." "I will," she said. "I promise." After everyone had gone, Nathan and Clara stood in the front room amid the rearranged furniture and the empty coffee cups, and Clara looked at the stack of signed documents in her hands and felt something she did not have a name for, something that was larger than relief and more complicated than triumph, and had the particular quality of a moment you know even as it is happening that you will remember for the rest of your life. "We did it," she said. "We started it," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Don't undersell it," she said. "I'm not," he said. I'm being accurate. The hard part is still coming. She knew he was right. She also knew that he was saying it not to diminish what they had built in that room tonight, but because he was Nathan, and Nathan did not let himself feel too far ahead of the facts. It was the same quality that had steadied his voice in the barn on the night of the blizzard, and kept his hands calm when he read the bank letter, and carried him through 4 years of managing everything alone. The refusal to pretend the difficulty was smaller than it was. She loved that about him. The thought arrived without warning, simple and complete, and she did not flinch from it. She loved that about him. She was beginning to understand that she loved a great many things about him, and that the list had been growing since the morning she found warm water waiting for her in the kitchen, and that it showed no signs of stopping. The consolidated filing arrived at the territorial court in Cheyenne 12 days later. Clara knew the exact moment it was received because Gerald Pruitt, who had apparently spent the intervening weeks making a series of quiet and increasingly consequential decisions about which side of this situation he wanted to be on, sent a brief note to the ranch confirming receipt and adding in a postscript that was not strictly professional but was entirely human. "You were right to ask the questions. I should have answered them sooner." Clara read the postscript twice. Then she folded the letter and put it in the tin box in the front closet beside Nathan's father's deed and his mother's poetry book, because it seemed like the kind of thing that belonged there. Hargrove's response came in 2 forms. The first was legal. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss on the grounds that the records obtained from Pruitt were unauthorized, that the deed filings Clara had cited were misinterpreted, and that the entire complaint was the product of a coordinated harassment campaign by parties with a financial interest in damaging his reputation. Clara read the motion and was not surprised by any of it. She had anticipated every argument and had already prepared the counterfilings. The second form was less formal. 3 days after the legal response arrived, Nathan came in from the barn in the middle of the afternoon, moving faster than his usual pace, and when Clara looked up from the desk, she could see from the set of his jaw that something had happened. "What?" she said. "Someone cut the fence on the south pasture," he said. "The back section, near the creek." Clara set down her pen. "Cattle," she said. 11 head got out," he said. "I've rounded 8 back. 3 are still in the lower field." She was already standing, already reaching for her coat. "I'll help you look," she said. "Clara." "I'll help you look," she said again, and there was nothing in her voice that allowed for argument. They found the 3 remaining cattle before dark, standing in the lower field with the cold coming down and their breath visible in the air. Nathan looked at the cut fence wire in his hands. It had not broken. It had been cut cleanly with something sharp, and his jaw was tight in a way she had learned meant he was managing something she wasn't seeing on the surface. "He's telling us something," Nathan said. "I know," Clara said. "He's telling us this can get physical." "I know." She looked at him. "Does it change anything?" He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the wire in his hands. He looked at the fence line and the fields beyond it and the last light going out of the sky over the mountains. "No," he said. "Good," Clara said. "But I want you to be careful," he said. "I want you to—" "Nathan." "I mean it, Clara. If something happened to you because I—" "Nathan," she said more firmly. "Listen to me." He looked at her. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said. "And even if something did, I am not a person you need to protect from the consequences of fighting for what's right. I am a person who chose to be here. I am choosing it right now, standing in this field. Do you understand me?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said finally. "Good," she said. "Now let's fix the fence before it gets fully dark." They fixed the fence, and that night after supper, Nathan sat across from her at the kitchen table and said without preamble, "I need to tell you something else about Denver." She looked up from the letter she was drafting. "There's more," she said. "Not about the debt," he said. "About why I left in the first place." She set down her pen. "I told you I went to Denver because I was about to lose the ranch," he said. "That's true, but I didn't tell you the whole of it." He paused. I left because I was in love with a woman in Red Hollow who was engaged to another man, and I couldn't stay and watch it. Clara was very still. Her name was Margaret Ellison, Nathan said. She was kind, and she was already spoken for by the time I understood what I felt. I handled it badly. I made financial decisions that were driven by the fact that I was 24 and heartbroken and not thinking clearly, and I left. And when I came back, she and her husband had moved to Oregon, and I have never told anyone this because it sounds like a young man's foolishness, and I suppose it was. He looked at the table. I'm telling you because you told me something real about the platform, he said, about tearing the letter. And I thought you should know that I came to you carrying something too. Not just the debt, the reason for the debt. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How long ago? 10 years, he said. Do you still think about her? He looked up. Honestly? Always honestly, she said. No, he said. I thought I would. For a long time I assumed I would. But somewhere in the last 2 months. He stopped. No, I don't. She held his gaze. Thank you for telling me, she said. Thank you for not making it into something it isn't, he said. It's the story of a young man who loved someone and got hurt and made some bad decisions, she said. That's a story I've heard before. It doesn't frighten me. I know it doesn't, he said. That's why I could tell you. She picked up her pen. Then she set it back down. Nathan, she said. Yes. I'm in love with you. The kitchen was absolutely silent. She had not planned to say it then. She had in fact been maintaining a careful and entirely self-aware practice of not saying it until she felt certain it would not startle him, until she felt she understood enough of his rhythms to know when he was ready to receive something like that. She had apparently misjudged the timing, or perhaps she had judged it perfectly. Nathan was looking at her the way he had looked at her on the barn floor when she had said the same thing you would have done for me, with an expression she had finally learned to read, the one that meant he was processing something that had arrived at the exact center of him. I know, he said, very quietly. You know, she said. I've known for a while, he said. I was waiting. For what? For you to know it, he said. She stared at him. Then she said, That is the most Nathan Cole thing you have ever said to me. Is that a complaint? No, she said. It's a compliment. She paused. Are you going to say it back? He looked at her steadily. I have been in love with you, he said, since the morning you put that paper beside my coffee cup and told me someone had been overcharging me for feed. She laughed. She could not help it. That is a very unromantic moment to fall in love, she said. It was the moment I knew you were real, he said. Not what I hoped you'd be. Not what I'd imagined. Real. The actual you doing the actual work of being here. He paused. That's when I knew. She held that, turned it over, let it settle. All right, she said. All right, he agreed. She picked up her pen again. I'm going to finish this letter, she said. And then I'm going to need you to read it. I'll be here, he said. The territorial court scheduled the hearing for early March. The weeks between were the hardest and the most clarifying of Clara's life, and she would think about them often in the years that followed, not with dread, but with a kind of clear-eyed gratitude for what they had asked of her, and what they had shown her she was capable of. Hargrove did not cut the fence again. He moved instead to a legal strategy, filing countercomplaint after countercomplaint, each designed not to win on the merits, but to generate delay and cost, and the grinding attrition of a legal fight that a wealthy man could sustain, and a working rancher could not. Clara answered every filing. She wrote at the desk in the front room in the evenings after the ranch work was done, and Nathan sat near her and read what she had written and asked questions, and twice caught errors that would have cost them momentum. Tom Briggs rode over twice a week to check in. Henderson, whose wife had stabilized enough that the worst immediate fear was behind them, had become a committed and energized participant in the consolidated case in the way that people become energized when they discover that the catastrophe that has been bearing down on them has a name and a shape and can be fought. Sadie Marsh, as it turned out, had a nephew in Cheyenne who was a practicing attorney. She had mentioned this to him on the Monday after the meeting. He had agreed to review the filings. By Wednesday, he had agreed to represent the consolidated case pro bono, on the grounds that, as he put it in a letter to Clara, that she read aloud to Nathan at breakfast, "This is either the clearest case of systematic rural fraud I have ever encountered, or it is the most thorough piece of amateur legal work I have ever reviewed, and either way, I want to be in the room when it resolves." His name was Daniel Marsh, and he was 32 years old, and had the kind of precise, aggressive legal intelligence that recognized quality work immediately and built on it rather than replacing it. When he arrived at the ranch to review the full file, he sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours, reading every page Clara had prepared, asking questions, pushing back on weak points, stress-testing arguments. Nathan made coffee and stayed out of the way because he recognized immediately that Clara and Daniel Marsh were operating in the same key and did not need him in the conversation. At the end of 3 hours, Daniel Marsh set down the last page and said, "Mrs. Cole, who taught you to think like this?" "My father," she said, "and necessity." "You should have been an attorney," he said. "I know," she said. "I intend to make up for lost time." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The Denver connection is the strongest element. If we can establish in court that Hargrove's organization had prior contact with this ranch, prior hostile contact before the formal acquisition attempts began, we move this from opportunistic fraud to premeditated economic coercion. That changes the damages calculation considerably." "How considerably?" Nathan said from across the room. Daniel Marsh looked at him. "Considerably enough that Hargrove would have to decide whether winning is worth what losing would cost him." The hearing was on a Tuesday. The courtroom in Cheyenne was full in the way that courtrooms in territorial towns are full, when the case has rippled outward through the community, and everyone who knows anyone involved has found a reason to be present. Clara counted 4 people she recognized from Red Hollow in the gallery, including Ada Mortimer, who caught her eye when she came in and gave a single firm nod. Clara nodded back. The judge was a compact, careful man named Holloway, who had the reputation, according to Daniel Marsh, of reading every piece of evidence himself and forming his own opinion before hearing arguments, which meant that the work Clara had done in the pages of that filing was going to matter more than the performance in the courtroom. Hargrove was present with 2 attorneys. He sat at the opposite table with the controlled composure of a man who has sat in courtrooms before and understands that composure is itself a form of argument. Clara sat beside Daniel Marsh. Nathan sat behind her. She could feel him behind her, the way you feel a solid wall when you lean back against it, not dramatically, not intrusively, but with the complete reliability of something that will not move. She did not look back. She did not need to. The arguments took most of the day. Daniel Marsh presented the consolidated case with the precise economy of someone who has spent a week preparing to make 3 hours of evidence feel inevitable. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform outrage. He laid out the facts in sequence supported at every point by the documentation Clara had prepared, and he let the pattern speak for itself. Hargrove's attorneys attacked the provenance of the Pruitt records, the interpretation of the deed filings, and the credibility of the Denver connection. They were skilled and well prepared, and twice they landed points that made Clara's jaw tighten under her composed expression. The third time when they characterized the consolidated filing as a coordinated campaign of harassment by financially motivated parties. Daniel Marsh said quietly, "If 7 independent families operating on 7 separate properties, discovering through independent research that they have all been paying the same fraudulent fee to the same beneficial owner, constitutes a coordinated campaign, then I would suggest the word coordinated belongs to the other side of this table." Judge Holloway looked up from his papers at that. He said nothing. But he looked. The recess was 40 minutes. Clara sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Nathan beside her, and did not pretend that she was calm, because she had been many things in the last 4 months. But she had stopped pretending, and the honest truth was that she did not know what Judge Holloway was going to do, and the not knowing had a physical quality that she was managing one breath at a time. "Nathan," she said. "I know," he said. "I've done everything I can think of," she said. "Every argument, every piece of evidence, every angle." "I know," he said. "If it's not enough, it'll still be more than we had 4 months ago," he said. "And we'll figure out what comes next." She looked at him. "You're not afraid," she said. "I'm afraid," he said. "But I'm sitting next to the most capable person I've ever met, and I have been since October, and I've gotten used to believing that whatever happens next is something we can handle." She held that. Then she said, "When this is over, whatever the outcome, I want to go home." "To the ranch," he said. "Home," she said, and she said the word the way she meant it, with all of its weight and specificity, and the full understanding of what it now contained. He understood. "Yes," he said. "Let us go home." Judge Holloway returned to the courtroom, sat behind his bench, looked at the papers in front of him, and delivered his ruling in the measured cadence of a man who has thought carefully about every word. He found in favor of the consolidated complaint on all primary counts. He ordered the repayment of fraudulently collected fees across all 7 properties, with interest calculated from the date of first collection. He referred the systematic fraud finding to the Territorial Attorney General's office for further investigation. He denied Hargrove's motion to dismiss, denied his countercomplaint, and ordered his legal costs paid from the damages assessment. The final item, the one that Clara had not expected, the one that Daniel Marsh had argued for in a section she had not written, and had therefore allowed herself to forget, was in the filing, was a permanent injunction against any further acquisition attempts on the properties named in the consolidated complaint, pending the outcome of the Attorney General's investigation. Hargrove could not go to the bank. He could not cut fences. He could not move against a single property in that valley while the investigation was open. He was frozen. The courtroom was not silent when Holloway finished. There was a sound, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The sound of people who have been holding their breath, releasing it all at once. Clara sat completely still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she felt Nathan's hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered it with her own. She did not cry because she was not yet in a place where she could afford to cry, and also because the feeling that was moving through her was not grief adjacent. It was something cleaner than that. Something that had the quality of a door opening onto a room that was larger than the hallway that had led to it. Daniel Marsh leaned over and said quietly, "You built this case, Mrs. Cole. This is yours." "Ours," she said. "It belongs to all of them." He nodded. "Yes, but you built it." Outside the courtroom, Tom Briggs shook Nathan's hand and then unexpectedly shook Clara's hand too firmly with both of his in the way that means something more than a handshake. Henderson was talking to the Kellerman brothers with an animation she had never seen in him before. The animation of a man from whom a weight has been removed so thoroughly that he has temporarily forgotten how to move without it. Sadie Marsh embraced her nephew. Old Walter Price stood near the door with his hat in his hands, and the expression of a man who has arrived at the far end of something very long and is taking a moment to understand where he is. He caught Clara's eye. "9 years, he said. "I know," she said. "How did you know to look?" he said. She thought about how to answer. She thought about the ledger and the tin box and the deed and the slip of paper Pruitt had slid across his desk. She thought about her father's colleague in Cheyenne and the education everyone around her had called wasted, and the years of managing quietly and invisibly because being visible had cost too much. "I was used to being underestimated," she said. "It turned out to be useful." Walter Price looked at her for a moment. "I'd say it turned out to be the most useful thing that happened to this valley in 9 years, he said. The ride home from Cheyenne took 4 hours. For the first hour, neither of them said very much. There was a particular kind of silence that comes after something large has resolved, not empty silence, but full silence, the kind that needs time to settle before it can be spoken into. Clara sat beside Nathan on the wagon and watched the landscape and felt the court's ruling move through her in slow waves, each one carrying a different piece of what had happened. After a while, Nathan said, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about Boston," she said. He glanced at her. "Do you miss it?" "No," she said, and was surprised by the completeness of her own answer. "I'm thinking about the woman who lived there, the one who managed the finances invisibly and showed just enough intelligence to be charming and sat in a small apartment and listened to the mail slot and hoped." "What about her?" Nathan said. "I'm thinking she would not recognize any of this," Clara said. "Any part of it. The ranch, the filings, the courtroom, you." She paused. "She would have looked at all of it and said she wasn't capable of it." "Was she wrong?" Nathan said. "She was entirely wrong," Clara said. "She just needed somewhere to be herself without apology." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Did you find it?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I found it on a platform in Red Hollow, Wyoming, even though I very nearly walked away from it." He looked at the road. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "So am I," she said. "Every single day." The ranch appeared as the late afternoon light moved long and golden across the fields. The farmhouse, the barn, the fence lines. They had repaired together the south pasture where the creek ran through land that now carried a court's protection. Clara looked at all of it and felt something that she understood fully and without reservation to be love, not just for Nathan, for the place itself, for what it had cost and what it had taught her and what it had turned out to be. "Nathan," she said as they pulled up to the house. "Yes." "I want to write a letter." He looked at her curious. "To who?" "To Mrs. Harlow," she said. "In Boston. She's the one who told me about you. She deserves to know how it turned out." "What will you tell her?" he said. Clara thought about it. She thought about the letter she had torn on the platform. She thought about warm water before dawn, and Whitman quoted across a supper table, and a man who held his hat in both hands and did not smile because he did not perform, and 40 minutes on a barn floor talking to a sick horse and a slip of paper with a name on it, and a courtroom in Cheyenne where $1,400 of stolen money had just been ordered, returned to the people it belonged to. She thought about all of the ordinary days and difficult nights and honest conversations that had assembled themselves, without her planning them, into a life she had not known she was building until it was already built. "I'll tell her," Clara said, "that she was right about the man. She just didn't know the half of it." Nathan climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side and held out his hand. She took it. She stepped down. She stood beside him in front of the house that his parents had built and that she had fought for, and that was without any remaining doubt in any corner of hers. And the woman who had arrived at Red Hollow with a torn letter and a sinking heart and a bag full of someone else's expectations looked at the life in front of her. Real, hard, honest, and entirely her own, and understood with the full weight of everything she had learned and lost and found in this place, that some people spend their whole lives searching for a love that feels like home. Clara Whitmore had married a stranger by letter, stepped off a train with her heart already closing, and discovered that the man she almost refused to see was the truest thing she had ever been given. She had chosen to stay. And that single choice made in fear on a Wyoming platform when she descended those train steps instead of climbing back up them had become the foundation of everything. She had her answer. She had always been exactly where she was supposed to be.